Hey guys, so today we are answering a subscriber question, and the question in question was, Frederick, how do you feel when you can't produce your best at work? So let's get into it. Well, I suppose bad would be the easy answer. So what I want you to take away from this is that not being able to do your best at work feels bad. But I suppose we have to have something a little bit more concrete and something, a little bit more elaborate than that. Otherwise, this will be a very boring video. So the thing is that although it is absolutely true that I will feel bad that when I can't produce as good as I want, I have started to, I've started to realize something, and that is that the naive part of me, which the person I used to be when I first started writing software, this person who was obsessed with best practices and trying to write the absolute best software at any given moment, that person has, I've kind of realized that the way that I thought was very unfeasible, and I will explain why. Like, the epiphany that I had came in many, basically this person died the death of 1,000 cuts. I had these small things that happened throughout my career to a point where I started to realize what things actually was about. One of the things that was very profound for me was that I realized that not being able to produce your best at work doesn't necessarily mean that you're not doing the right thing. It's just that the circumstances that you find yourself in require you to make a subpar implementation of something. But even in that scenario, you can choose the lesser evil. I mean, that's the whole false assumption for a lot of especially junior developers when they start working in IT. And that is that, especially in the beginning, you will look inwards and think that you are responsible for every single line of code that you write. And although that is true, the actual letters that you type out, the symbols that you type out, those you are responsible for. But you are not responsible for the context, and that is the thing that makes a world of difference. You see, one of the things that the tech talkers will never ever account for, or very rarely, the good tech talkers will account for this, but the really shitty ones will talk from the position of an idealist. In other words, they will talk about architecture decisions and best practices as if there is no previous state. In other words, we don't have a context, we don't have any circumstances. And that is a very convenient position to start a discussion from, because if there's nothing before, that means that you are free to do whatever you want. And then we can live in a happy fantasy world where everything is this way. Because if everything is a greenfield project, you can make any best decision that you want because you're starting fresh. But most of the time, you find yourself in a situation where decisions have been made on your behalf way, way, way before you even started writing any code. A simple thing as an unfeasible deadline, or a request that seems very odd, or something that is outside of what the system was originally designed to do, can mess up everything. And it can happen at any moment. It can happen like tomorrow. Somebody can come in and tell you that this application that you've built with one set of premises, with one set of feature requirements, they can just come in and change their mind and say that, oh yeah, it's going to have to do this thing now. It used to do this, but now it's going to have to do this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And all these requirements, as they come in, your job as a software developer is to accommodate all of the whims that you can possibly imagine. And that is the problem with our industry, or this is the problem of this craftsmanship, this craft that we are part of. If you are asked to build a single product, in the product industry, this is a very convenient thing. You have a physical product. Somebody has sat down and in a very deterministic way said to you that, let's say that you wanted to build a toaster. You're going to build that toaster, and once that toaster is built, nobody can mess with it. It has been shipped. It has been shipped out to your customers, and this is the toaster that they have to deal with. If you want to make another toaster, that's fine. You don't change the toaster that you have. You simply create a new one. You take the learnings from the last project and or the last toaster, and you build a new one with the improvements that you want to have in that version. And that's the way this kind of works. In software development, it's a very different thing. You don't create one small little project, ship that, and then start from scratch and build the next thing when the new set of requirements come in. What you do is that you upgrade your existing project. And that is a lot harder. It's a lot harder because now you need to continuously have this situation where you need to add in, regardless of the request, you need to add things to this thing that was designed to do one thing from the beginning with one certain way of thinking, and you just need to append whatever is required. And at some point, you're going to get to a situation where you simply can't really, in a nice, sustainable way, add more features to the system without making some type of ugly or ugly decision, or corner has to be cut somewhere. Something's going to happen. And when that happens, as I said, a junior or some people will take this at a very personal level. They will look at themselves and say that I can't fix this and it's so bad and I want to rewrite this and all of these things, right? But you can't. That's the nature of reality. You're not living in a perfect world. You have the situation that you have and there's nothing you can do about it. You can inform and you can say that in accordance with best practices or the way that I want to do this and so forth, you can absolutely start that discussion, but very rarely are you going to get any type of adherence to it unless there's a very, very, very strong incentive to hear you out and go with the thing that you suggest. I mean, I don't know how many programmers would talk about rewrites left and right. So what I try to do when I have those situations at work where I have to make some type of decision that is subpar with what I want, well, the way that and this is the thing, this is my personal favorite of all the, the programming sayings out there in the world, and that is loose coupling is important. I like to call it having disposable code. You see, if you start with the mindset that, all right, you can at any point in time get a feature request that changes the fundamental way that that one of your already existing features needs to work. That brings a certain type of uncertainty with it every single time, where when you sit down and you write a solution, you need to think about how can I make this as disposable as possible? How can I make this the most isolated thing I can? Because one of the dangerous things is if you create elaborate solutions that are very static, that requires, I mean, if a feature request comes in and that changes fundamentally how this needs to work, then you're pretty much fucked because it's tied into everything. The more connections it has within the code base, the harder it is to actually change it. It's very likely that you can very easily change something that is very isolated. An example is a good example is if you wanted to switch out your logging framework as an example, that would be a very simple thing for a lot of, in a normal project, because a logger is usually just a single line somewhere within the code with one connection point, and that is usually the instantiation of the logger and some configuration file. But it would be very tricky for you to say to take an extreme example, say in front end you're going to remove Redux or some other backbone feature, you're going to change your routing system or something like that. That is a very high risk type of operation. It's very unlikely that you're ever going to be able to make such a rewrite. And the same thing goes for when you're implementing features. So basically what I try to do when I'm forced into these situations where I have to make an ugly piece of code is to isolate that ugliness as much as I humanly can. In other words, try to think about it yourself. How can I isolate this into either a single module or a service or something like that, so that the remaining code around it stays roughly in the same state that it is? Because I can't just rewrite everything every time something ugly comes along. I just have to isolate that ugliness to a point where if somebody needs to either understand this or ideally, in a perfect world, rewrite it or remove it, it should be as easy as possible to do that. So what I want you to take away from this is that although, most people would say that they feel bad when they can't perform their best at work or write the best solutions that they want, you are going to face these problems simply because in a perfect world, you would start from scratch every time you have a new feature. And that would be perfect, because then you can always kind of solve the problem in a perfect manner, because there are no decisions made before. You don't have any legacy, you don't have any already existing system that you need to take into account. But most of the time you do, and when you do, the only thing you can really do when somebody's asking you to do something that feels ugly is to try to isolate that ugliness as much as humanly possible and create the loosest coupling that you can, or ideally the most disposable code that you can. In other words, if it's isolated, the ugliness is still there, but at the very least it's in a very controlled area of the code base. That's at least how I think about it. Have a great day.